Today on September 15th, we are in conversation with Frank Barat and Vijay Prashad, who have recently published a series of reflections that were developed together over a series of exchanges, a lot of them taking place in the deep context of the pandemic. The result is a finely edited book called Struggle Makes Us Human. And I would encourage people to look that up themselves and read the exchanges. So first of all, I'll just say hi and thank you so much to both of you for the exchange and the continuation of the conversation today.
It's great to be with you. Nice to see the lovely trees behind you.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. And we both love the t-shirt, even though I guess, the radio folks are not going to see anything, but we'll publish the video. So,
Well, I'll just say it is a t-shirt of Radio Hara, which is a community arts broadcasting project in occupied Palestine. So anybody who's interested, I'd encourage people to check it out at radiohara.net. So first of all, I'll just share that Struggle Makes Us Human is a really fluid project. You impressively, even within the different sections, travel to diverse spots in the globe, looking at the contradictions and the challenges of social movements, questions of power. And one of the first points that is raised is this idea of the continuation or the critique that is voiced around the idea of a continuous line of progress in relation to social movement struggles. The point that Vijay keeps bringing up, and there's a series of examples that are highlighted, is the concept of a zigzag, which I loved both as a visual terminology, but also in terms of thinking about time in a non-linear fashion, if we want to get into the concepts of provincializing Europe and decoloniality. But maybe first we could start there, and I'll go to Vijay and then to Frank to sort of think about the nonlinear concept of social movements and change, because I think that's not really still, unfortunately, the common framework of how social struggle is understood.
Yeah, Stefan, if you think about the image of, and I've used this image a lot in reference to Palestine, but if you think about the image of a person leaning over you as you lie in your bed, and they are holding a pillow in their hand, and they shove that pillow on your face, attempting to suffocate you, at some point you're going to fight them. No human being is going to just allow another person to suffocate them in their bed. They are going to fight them. Now, when you travel to a place like Gaza, or you travel to parts of let's say, southern Congo, the areas where the mining takes place. I was recently in the Atacama Desert in Chile. Travel to places like this, people are put in wretched social conditions where life is very difficult. Life is extraordinarily bare, and yet there is an incredible resilience, incredible desire to fight, to basically, execute one's humanity, to prove that one is a human being in that sense. So, as you fight from extremely adverse conditions, you will get defeated. That is inevitable, because you're fighting against people who are incredibly more powerful than you. In the case of Gaza, for instance, you're fighting against the Zionist war machine, which is incredibly powerful. And yet you return the next day and the next day and the next day, because you cannot allow yourself not to exercise your humanity. You will continue to fight. You will refuse to be made inert. You will refuse to be suffocated. And in that sense, I think the zigs and zags are important. If you look at the great history of anti-colonial movements, think of the defeats that people, had to face in the midst of their long battle against colonialism. Horrendous defeats, and yet they came back and fought again. I'm frustrated with a lot of the kind of writing that takes place now, where people throw their hands up in the air and say, there's so many problems, there's no solution, people are not fighting. Absolutely untrue. People are fighting all over the world. There's a big difference between fighting against suffocation and being able to win. people are fighting, but they're not always winning. And I think keeping that gap in line helps us understand the zigs and the zags. You can take a defeat, but you'll come back. Will you win? That's a separate question.
Thanks so much, Vijay, for sharing your thoughts on this. I'd like to also maybe focus on two examples from that section of the book. But Frank, if you could share any reflections in relation to this point, and also your own involvement in supporting social movements on a local level, but also more broadly trying to connect that to an international scale. Because that's always a challenge, is how do we draw and make connections between very local organizing on a neighborhood-based level all the way to an international level. And I think that is also one of the challenges the radical left faces in terms of scaling and structures of power.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. I mean, there's this saying, right? It's better to die standing than live on your knees. And I think that's exactly what Vijay was talking about. And when you go to Palestine, or when you speak to local communities I live in Brussels, marginalized, racialized, that face like police brutality every day, you realize that you have a choice, and the choice is you either fight or you just don't fight and you leave on your knees. And I think most people, but I mean, it's very interesting in a way when you put this in regards to white folks. I'm white, because like, even though I guess some of us are very deeply involved with the movement, it's very hard for us to completely relate to minorities, racialized, marginalized, because we're not. And once we try to do it, we realize that actually they don't have a choice, and fighting is the only way, the only life they can lead until hopefully oppression falls. And but like a quick anecdote about this: a friend of mine is called I'll say his name, he's called Nael Khleifi. He's actually the son of Michel Khleifi, the very well-known sort of the pioneer of Palestinian cinema. And Nael recently told me that, so Nael is born in Belgium, he's entirely Belgium. He could look Arabic, but his mother in Belgium, so he looks very Belgian. He told me that until you live it and you experience it, you can't put yourself in the shoes of, if you're a man, of a woman of color, or of a Muslim. And he said that between 18 and 19, he had this like period where he thought, I'm a Muslim. He wasn't, like, his dad is actually a Christian Palestinian, but he was like, no, I'm a Muslim. So he said, like, in the space of a couple of weeks, he's changed his appearance. He started wearing the sort of Muslim, hat, and he grow his beard. And he said, Frank, you can't understand how my life changed in 6 months. The way people looked at me, the way if I was going to a shop, the shopkeeper would like bend over to see if like I didn't steal anything. The way people sometimes change, on the pavement, they crossed the street when they saw me. It was like, he told me, an incredible experience, incredible and very telling. So I think, we have to understand that for people like Palestinians and others, they don't have a choice, and they will fight. And in a way, like the example of Palestine is the best one, because like, even though the Zionist movement has tried to expel them via incredible force in 47, 48, and now like it's a slow sort of drip ethnic cleansing, they're still there. So I think that's the biggest victory.
I would just maybe follow up with something that draws on both of your reflections, which is also what was mentioned, the question of scaling and the relationship between the violence of the colonial capitalist system today and how it manifests at an individualized level, but also how it operates on a systemic level. If we look to the global justice movement and the critiques of, international finance, institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, which is still functioning, and I think not as much in the headlines, there was a very meaningful critique of the systemic violence of these structures and how that translated across the world, from the ways that it pushed small farmers off their land through the imposition of corporate agriculture and monocropping and GMO products as driven by US corporations, for example. But this larger systemic critique also, of course, translates to daily experience rooted in colonialist violence and histories of violence, and how that manifests in the ways Frank was talking about on an individual level. But Vijay, you were talking about also the challenges of social movements on a broader scale. At this moment in 2022, we're at a very interesting crossroads, it seems. And your book really, I think, opens up a window, and your conversations, Frank and Vijay, to look at this challenge we face, which is the connection point between this mainstreaming of the ways that these systems of violence manifest on a personal level, but ensuring that that personal level is connected to a broader systemic critique. So I would love to hear your reflections on sort of this moment of challenge and how to deal with the nuance there, because it's very, very challenging, which I'm sure you both understand very well.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows the problems. I mean, that's one of the strange things about the world, isn't it? That the diagnoses of the problems are even shared by quite mainstream people. You pick up a United Nations report, and it's pretty clear, these are the problems. I just read the recent Human Development Report, and they said for the first time in 32 years, there's been a decline for 2 years, consecutive years, of all human indicators. 90% of the world's countries have seen a decline in human indicators. This includes increase of hunger and so on. The cost of living crisis is going to escalate some of these. Everybody knows what the problem is. Everybody also knows that the very small minority of rich people have all the power, privilege, and property that they don't deserve. I mean, tens of trillions of dollars held by just a few people. It's not. There's no need for analysis. We don't need another 100 books about this. We need to figure out why is it that 6-7 billion people, more 7.895 billion people are not able to overcome 20 people that dominate the world. I mean, what's the problem? Like demographically, we are the overwhelming majority, not 99%, 99.999 to the end percent. What's the problem? The problem is we can't build power. And here comes ideology, plays a big role. Mystifications of all kinds, the belief that if I try hard enough, I can do well. And despite the fact that generation upon generation have not been able to succeed, we continue to have this myth of individual success, pushed down our throats. There's also the worry for oneself and one's family, forms of nepotism, forms of personal desire. Like, I know the planet is going to hell, but at least my children must advance. They must do well. All these mystifications interrupt our lives. And what this does at the same time, it decreases our confidence in our own capacity to change the world. And I think for me, the idea of confidence is key. I was watching in the UK, these big strikes of transport workers, the RMT, cascading strikes, nurses and others going on strike. Well, every time you see a strike, and when you see a movement leader like Mick Lynch speak so clearly in, mainstream television, it gives a person in their home confidence that, if Mick Lynch, who speaks like me, can go on to television, BBC, and talk back to some of these Cambridge-educated, neoliberal thinkers, well, maybe I should get onto the street. Cascading sense of confidence. We saw this in the farmers' struggle. And let me give you this as a brief example. Between 1995, when Indian agriculture liberalized, and maybe the mid 2000s, the first decade of the 2000s, almost 300,000 Indian farmers committed suicide. It's like the largest mass suicide in the world. They were committing suicide exactly for the reasons you mentioned, Stefan, that they were losing their land, they were not able to make a living, and so on. Can you imagine that there was this mass suicide and it was barely mentioned in the mainstream newspapers? Well, farmers in Maharashtra, a state in India, started a protest. They did a long march from Nasik to Mumbai. It caught the imagination. The All India Kisan Sabha, the main farmers association, main farmers body, then took the lessons of Maharashtra and ran a major struggle in Rajasthan. Again, they did a long march. They went, with motorcycles, and it was a fantabulous kind of event. Eventually, when the Modi government tried to shove down the farmers' throats laws that would Uberize farming, make them essentially like Uber drivers, they just said no. And then hundreds of thousands of farmers, rather than commit suicide, went and surrounded the city of Delhi and made the government back down. It's really important that people all over the world look at these stories. You got a choice between either committing actual suicide or kind of social suicide, or you struggle. And if you struggle, you can win. Many years ago when I was a kid, I read a line from Lenin, and I'm going to put this in there. I know it might make some people uncomfortable, but there was a line from Lenin. Lenin said, if you're too afraid to lose, you won't do anything. If you're too afraid to lose, you won't do anything. And that's about confidence. You're going to have the confidence. Because remember, he said, if you're too afraid to lose, that means you don't have confidence. You got to generate confidence. Confidence doesn't come by me and you telling people, have confidence. Confidence comes by learning about what other people are doing, that they are going out in struggle. Transport workers in the UK, farmers in India, landless workers in Brazil. Those stories become infectious. And that's what I feel. I feel like we know what the problems are. We need to do something. And what's holding us back is the mystifications of ideas and ideology and so on, and also a lack of confidence.
In the examples you highlighted, Vijay, there's a connection between also that individual experience of social movement, struggles and mobilization and collective action. So just drawing a bit more on that connection point, Frank, if you have any thoughts on that, because I also know that you have experience in relation to visiting that space between individual participation and larger questions of collective organization.
Yeah, and I think, to sort of follow on Vijay's point, even if the numbers don't compare, the rate of suicide right now inside the NHS, for example, in the UK, doctors, nurses, or inside of the education system, teachers, is incredible. I mean, and it says a lot. Again, it doesn't compare to the Indian farmers, but the rates are up. And I think because we're going through a system, people always say, I mean, the system is broken. For me, it's not. The system fulfilled its purpose entirely. The capitalist system is about, as we just said, stomping on people, 99.9% of the population, and making the other. So again, it's not about reform. It's about thinking of completely dismantling and abolishing the system to create something better. But I also understand that for most people, it's a mountain, it's too high to climb. So we have to work with the macro and the macro and the local to build power. And we start, like with a small sort of council, and then you go up and up. But it's the ideology in place and the way consent has been manufactured, to quote Herman and Chomsky, is so powerful, and you see it every day. I mean, to people you talk to in the street, at work, on Zooms, this, Tina, there is no alternative, is still very much in people's head. People don't think we can do it. and that's also what Vijay talks about, the question of confidence. And you speak a lot about this in the book, Vijay, and you say that you mentioned the first time you went to a demonstration, I think in India, and the way it builds confidence so much, because in a way we are taught every day, if you watch mainstream media, corporate media, that we're alone. We powerless. Get your €1,000 a month, buy whatever you can with it, and that's it. But once you get to a huge demonstration, or once you become involved in praxis, in a way, it changes everything. It does. I'm sure it did for you, Stefan. It did it for me. My first demonstration was in France against the National Front. I'd never been to a demo, and I've never felt so energized, after this. And I was scared. It was scary because the riot police was definitely on the side of the National Front. So we had to run and tear gas, but you never felt that empowered. And you feel the people you met in the streets, sometimes in a couple of days, could become brothers and sisters for life, stuff you'd never experienced before. So I think that's something, and that's why, in a way, demonstrations are important. Some people will say, we were 3 million in the streets against the Iraq war, but nothing happened, even though we know it's not the truth. But the fact being in the street itself is crucial, because it creates so much momentum and power and strength. So, and that's what you experience all the time. To sort of answer your question briefly, like, I remember when I went to Palestine as well the first time, they told us, we see you when we're in Gaza or in Nablus, and we see that there was like 1 million people in London against the aggression, the war of Israel. It gives us so much power as well. So demonstration have a massive role to play, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
I'll tell you a little story I just experienced, guys. I was in Ireland recently, and I visited Shannon. And on a Sunday at 2 p.m., about 20 feet walk from the perimeter of Shannon Airport, I met about 10 activists who belong to Shannon Watch. They are there once a month at 2 p.m. on the second Sunday. Among them was Marguerite D'Arcy, who's an important Irish filmmaker. Frank will know her. She's a playwright. She was an extraordinary reference at the Greenham Women's Common in the 1980s and so on. There was Marguerite, age 88 years old. Just a few years ago, she and Niall Farrell ran onto the runway to block an aircraft which was most likely carrying somebody who was undergoing extraordinary rendition, the illegal program of the US government. Now, it's because of people like Marguerite D'Arcy and others that pressure has been put on the Irish government for its collaboration with the US war machine. And in a sense, it's because of them that we learned about the extraordinary rendition program. Yes, it's true. We all want to be once in a while in demonstrations with millions of people, and those count. But demonstrations of small numbers of people also count. And the first demonstration, what Frank said is correct. The first time you go out for them, it's hugely inspiring, terrifying, and all that. By the way, for me, going out to my millionth demonstration, I'm still terrified. Age of 55, haven't been to demonstrations since my teens. I'm still scared when I have to go. I still think, will there be anybody there? What am I doing? Am I too old for this? All these things go through my head. This is a kind of confidence that you have to, in a way, build every time. Every day when you wake up, I'm no great sympathizer for, self-affirmative kind of rituals, like I am okay, I'm alive, and so on. But there's nothing wrong with that, to affirm yourself on a regular basis. People of the left sometimes forget that they are people who must also affirm on a regular basis first principles. What happens, guys, is you become desolate and you also become arrogant. Like, oh, I know things and I know how the world works and other people don't know, and so on. A kind of arrogance enters into our traditions, but also a kind of desolation. I've been doing this over and over again, and you sort of have an Eeyore attitude to it. The sky is going to fall on my head and I'm going, but nobody cares. And this is a very wrong attitude. We need to be enthusiastic every time we go out. We need to feel a little of the fear, a little bit of the lack of confidence. We need to allow ourselves to feel human. And I think sometimes in the left, a kind of, a hard hippopotamus skin develops where people become super like insensate. They don't feel things. And it's really important to encourage feeling, because that's how you make bridges with other people. Not that, oh, I'm an expert at demonstrations, welcome to your first there's no need to be arrogant about it. Every demonstration in a way is like a first demonstration. There is a sense of fear. Every piece of our struggle is a renewal of our capacity to be human. So I'm very much in favor of a kind of recurrence of that feeling, not just the first time, but always.
Yeah, I mean, if I can add something, because it made me think of, I think Arundhati Roy was the first time I heard this, but this to love and to be loved, that we often forget also on the sort of hard left. But love is at the core of everything, right? And I think when Vijay says like we've got to allow ourselves to be human and stuff, is also to show love, and show support and have this, this self-care that we all forget so often as activists, because you see so many friends and comrades that burn out because they, you cannot help anyone if you're yourself, very low in everything, right? So I think that's crucial.
The book that you both worked on, Struggle Makes Us Human, I think really in meaningful ways connects these personal experiences and personal reflections to points across the globe. I'd really encourage people to check it out and to read these conversations. And both of you, in many ways over the years, I think, have shown also ways to break isolation through your work in publishing books, radio, social media even, but to think about also how we can have these conversations, but also have these conversations in difference, right? So I think it's also important to underline the fact that social movements have debates about tactics, about strategy, about questions of power. And it's through those conversations that we can continue to move in these struggles and to actually learn from our histories. And there's so much there. And this book, I think, is very challenging in the sense that I can't think of a social movement internationally that is not addressed within these wide-ranging conversations, which is always impressive. And we've run out of time. So thanks for the conversation. And Vijay, Frank, good to talk with you.
Thanks. It's lovely to be with you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. And I think if I can add something, I think these books of conversations, in a way, that are quite small as well, and I think easy to read, can be very useful, because like it's all about conversations, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to tell your parents what's happening in the world, you're going to have a conversation with them. If you want to, if your friends don't agree with you, it's a conversation. So I think these conversations can be very, very useful because it can be also less heavy than very academic books and stuff like that. But anyway,
respect.
Thanks a bunch, comrades.
Thanks.